unprecedented amount of support from the public and parents, according to the corporate polls that papers like the LA Times report. So we have the staff coordinator, or some of your union calls the director or chief of staff for the Chicago Teachers Union Jackson product.
In our case, when my school was being closed by Arnie Duncan in 2005, and he called it a culture of failure, my union vice president came to the school the day after we found out the news and said, you guys should spruce up your resumes and look for new jobs, because the union contract doesn't do anything to protect you. And I was aghast as a young union activist. This is my union representation saying there's nothing we can do when they're trying to decimate the school community. How did we use this union apparatus to engage, inspire, and address our members' concerns and our natural allies? Well, one, we used to have delegate workshops. We have school elected leadership where there's one delegate approximately per building. If there's a lot of members, they have more than one. And normally on an annual basis, there would be a training of those delegates where the field staff would blather on in monotone about, what do you do if a child assaults you? What do you do if you're accused of, abuse or, something like that? What do you do if the principal disciplines you? What are your rights under the law? What are your rights to legal representation? And so 5% maybe of our union members were in those kinds of situations. For everybody else, this was a completely irrelevant and demoralizing conversation. And so it would turn into a situation where the only way our union leadership could get people to come out to these things was by offering freebies. And they would, put everybody up at the Holiday Inn. What we did is really transform that whole tradition into one where we talked about member-to-member communication. We had our members sitting down in workshops by network, geographically divided, where they took rosters from their schools and identified, well, who are the people that would be most effective at talking to their colleagues, to mobilize them, to engage them on any variety of union campaigns. Another thing we did was we started bringing community allies into these spaces. So we had local school council trainings with our teacher representatives from community allies. They started presenting at the forums alongside our union president. We brought in other labor allies who were also in the schools, represented the cafeteria workers and the janitors and the home care or the housekeeping. So that all helped. Typically, we use the grievance staff, people who really, just by the nature of the work, become little lawyers. You end up, no, it says this in this article, and then the boss's hearing officer says, no, it says this, and then you kind of fight over it until you hit arbitration. And that's not really an approach that invigorates the rank and file to fight back, right? It's one of, let's wait and see, hey, we got this, the language says this. So what we did is we created an organizing department that could do more of the things that I just described with our members in terms of troubleshooting, coming up with creative solutions, figuring out how to mobilize, figuring out what are the ways in which we can use parents as our natural allies to improve the school. And many of those people went through an organizing training this past summer where they went door to door and paid house visits to our members to get them prepared for the strike. So those people are now our phone bankers. And widely different results, much more successful. And we have also a lot more volunteer phone banks now than we ever did. Mail. We used our mailing system to typically send a letter to all our members that said the same stuff that was 2 pages long, and normally you could overlook it and not really see what it was trying to say. We use psychometrics in our mailing before, during, and after the strike. So what are the messages that are going to resonate with our paraprofessionals? What are the messages that will resonate with our clinicians? What are the messages that will resonate with our K-12 elementary high school members? What about probationary employees? And really thinking about which segments of the union were most disengaged and strategizing about ways to re-engage them through specific efforts, not assuming that one size fits all. The people who are furthest away from teaching get the greatest rewards in our system. And the union cannot adopt that culture and expect to be successful at relating to the members. So we really scaled back on some of the perks. You know, I don't get a car allowance. I just voluntarily, and none of the officers do. Most of us don't submit expense reports. You know, there are some people who do. It's something we still offer, and definitely our field reps run their cars into the ground, and organizers too, so they get all that stuff. But it was really important for us to make that effort, and that allowed us to use resources that have previously been tied up in these bloated salaries to create a research department for the first time, to create an organizing department for the first time in our history. You know, we've been around since 1937. This is the first time we had real organizers. We made sure to tie the fight for public education not simply to the question of salary and pensions and health care. Don't get me wrong, those things were part of the conversation. You'd be surprised. Parents were outraged by the fact this mayor was trying to make teachers work 20% longer and pay them nothing for it. It was a simple conversation. You know, I don't think we should be afraid of the economics when it comes to those kinds of things. Workers know if their boss tries to make them work 20% more with no pay, they're going to be really pissed off about it. We spent a lot of time building and developing community relationships. When I was in this classroom, we created a coalition known as the Grassroots Education Movement. I think there's a copycat in New York. And we had community and parent groups that have been invested in school protests for years. And so we took that body and we created a union coalition called the CTU Community Board that meets monthly. And that coalition is composed of 19 different neighborhood and labor organizations, primarily neighborhood organizations. And that was really the anchor of our community strategy. These were groups that were holding solidarity events during the strike, where they were engaging the community and teaching while the schools were closed about the importance of the strike. So you'd have students going to these strike schools, solidarity schools, and being taught by parents and community activists about why what we were doing was so critical. And part of their field trip every day was going to a strike location, a picket line. In terms of pushing back for the common good and how do we protect pensions, you know, one thing is we have to change the narrative. So we've been talking a lot about the LIBOR scandal and how that has crippled a lot of our pension funds through the malfeasance of the financial community. We talked about, you know, how the big banks are too big to fail and they crash the economy, and now it's trying to get balanced on workers' backs. Seems to have been an effective method of combating our state legislators' obsession with cutting our retirement benefits. But it's still a tough road to hoe. You know, all of us are facing this. You know, they're all using these prescriptions for austerity to justify these massive cuts without considering, well, what does a financial transaction tax look like? We released a map that shows a plotting of the school closings that are being proposed. They're all in the black community. The question of, does Facebook have more influence than does a virtual relationship trump a real relationship? No, that's nonsense. So what we did is we did that hard work of developing actual discussions, conversations, planning with our community allies, with our parents, with our members. And that was hard work. You know, it wasn't just shooting out an email to people. It wasn't just issuing a press release. Because that's not going to work, right? You actually have to create enough of a groundswell that these people start backing off. And that we have a chance to get rid of them. And I don't think there's any shortcuts in this. But our members did start doing their own media around things, and that was critical. So, you know, they would develop a school community program for exposing what was happening. A lot of them did get on the media doing that. And if we decentralize some of that instead of thinking, oh, the 80 bureaucrats downtown Chicago, they're responsible for everything the union knows and does, then all of a sudden you're talking about guerrilla media, you're talking about things popping up right and left, and these people are scrambling, what the hell's going on here? You know, my high-paid consultant isn't cutting it anymore. So I think, it's the same strategy of releasing the energy, the wherewithal, the intelligence, the beautiful creativity that we have amongst us, and allowing that to, gain momentum and steam. Last thing I want to say is just, we rejected the argument that our members were apathetic or that fear was preventing them from going to the next stage of action. And part of doing that was saying, well, first of all, nobody's apathetic about their jobs, even if they're disengaged and cynical. We got to figure out what's caused that mentality, what's really driving it, what experiences have they had to make them feel that way, and then re-energizing it. And that's not going to be everybody, but a lot of people, it works figuring that out. And two, fear is a natural reaction to, retaliation, to the overwhelming power and authority that we're faced with when the management tries to clamp down. And it's talking through, well, is it going to get better if we back off? What could we do to make it so that the boss doesn't have a chance to retaliate? If we're all fighting, are they going to fire all of us? And those were the kinds of conversations that help people get over their fear and into action.